Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Exit Wound, the journey of exploitation and beyond. I am Melanie Thompson, your host, a New York City-based survivor of sex trafficking and prostitution. If you didn't catch our very first little teaser episode, then go on and take a listen. It's sort of the manifesto for this show and why I'm so passionate about creating this space for survivors to come and speak and have real and raw, honest conversations. So, today, we're going to jump right into this. I am joined by the amazing Katrina Massey, a survivor of sex trafficking and a critical leader in the movement to advocate for survivors and create lasting change. Now, she and I have been working this public education and awareness piece for a very long time. We are constantly beating the drum of what exploitation looks like, what are the realities, what it is and what it isn't. And yet here we are today in 2024 and we are still answering the questions. There are so many misunderstandings and I can't say that. There are so many misunderstandings and misconceptions around what trafficking really is. So I want to start with the actual very simple definition of sex trafficking. It is the act of compelling or coercing a person to engage in commercial sex acts. Trafficking doesn't always require movement. You don't always have to be transported across state lines or borders to be a victim of trafficking. You can be trafficked in your own home. And a trafficker can be violent and forceful, literally like holding a gun to your head or something like that. But it could also be your boyfriend or somebody who uses you and manipulates you and subverts you at the end. So when you don't have any other options, sometimes that's a form of how somebody can be manipulated into trafficking. So given all of that, Katrina, I'm going to ask you first, what are your top 3 myths that you hear around trafficking in general?
I hear that it doesn't happen here. Here being all of the United States. And we all know from our own lived experiences and those that we've worked with over the years, it happens everywhere. No neighborhood is excluded. No specific race or class even is excluded from being trafficked.
I hear that. You know, most people think that, and I will use myself as an example. When I was trafficked as a kid, I was held in this house around the corner from my mother's house. But my mother thought I was smuggled to China or somewhere so far away. And like you said, most people think that trafficking only happens in places like South America, Asia. You know, we'll talk about where I think those perceptions come from in a minute. Have you heard about any of the recent conspiracy theories around human trafficking?
Yes. One of which that it doesn't happen here, or that human trafficking is a conspiracy, which
that's interesting.
Blows my mind. I actually years ago had this conversation with a politician who just did not believe it happened in the sweet Georgia, and it did not exist. And having to go back and forth with conversations after conversations, and he had it made up in his mind that it didn't exist and it was a conspiracy. The strangest conspiracy was like the Wayfair situation, where it's like, I don't even know how that started. I don't even know. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
And
Do you remember the details of that?
I feel like they were shipping a victim in couches.
It was something like
very strange.
Something weird like
that. That did not make any. You know, sometimes when you hear things, you kind of have to take a step back and like, how logical is this? And you know, they say common sense isn't common, but you know, like think a little bit about what would this actually look like. I think sometimes people see in their minds when they think of trafficking as in like many people being removed from their homes and places at a time and then shipped to these different places collectively. It's rare that happens too. And then there was another one, something about a pizza shop.
Oh, I don't even know. Is that like Pizzagate or something like that? I thought
it was
that
very
was
strange. I can't recall,
different.
but it's, you know, the information during the QAnon period that spread around trafficking, it just, it was quite disruptive to the movement and our work. Um, and, it's like we're always circling back to this conversation.
Always.
We're always having to circle back to this conversation of, no, that's not how it happens, but it looks like this. No, it didn't do, not quite. In rare circumstances, this can happen, but more commonly, it happens like this. So,
you know what else I've been seeing too, on Instagram and TikTok, especially during COVID, I saw a lot of these conspiracies pop up. And one of them I saw was the big zip tie conspiracy.
Oh my goodness, yes.
It was something with like a napkin and
the door handle.
And if you go to reach for the door, like I saw one where you go and reach for the door handle and then like they ask you for something or something comes up. There's so many different stories.
Someone put something in your windshield.
Exactly. And then they come up behind you and then they'll subdue you via zip ties. That was one crazy story I heard. Another one that I heard was there's a napkin that they, I think, leave either in your windshield or on the top of your car, and then it's poisoned. And when you go to like swipe it off the car, then it kind of knocks you out, and then they come and they take you for trafficking. There are so many different types of conspiracies like this, thoughts. And, I would just otherwise roll my eyes or shake it off or be like, that's just one person's, crazy narrative. But the reality is that these conspiracies have picked up so much traction with a lot of people. So what ended up happening was now you see this large social media push or this large campaign, about trafficking. And on the one hand, we know doing this work that trafficking is still very underrepresented and under talked about.
Absolutely.
So on one hand, it's like, it's great that we're seeing all of us having this conversation in society. But then if you're starting to have the conversation and it's inaccurate, this is where the problem lies. So
absolutely.
Speaking of inaccuracies, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the movies, right? Let's take a trip to the movies. So we have all types of different movies in our media from history's time all the way through about what trafficking and what the system of prostitution looks like. And oftentimes when I talk about what trafficking representation in the media is, I'm always telling folks it's a large spectrum. We have movies like Taken, which is on one end of the spectrum, all the way to Pretty Woman. And then in between, we have a whole bunch of other movies. So I want to start with Sound of Freedom. We don't have to get into all the nuances there, but this movie got a lot of attention over this past summer. And, it's a really, like we were just saying, it's really great to raise awareness, but we recognize that there are a lot of, I'm not going to call them inaccurate. I'm going to say that there are a lot of ways that it didn't accurately represent our experiences.
Absolutely.
And granted, we have lived experience with domestic sex trafficking here in the U.S., and Sound of Freedom was one of those movies that kind of showed this rescue mission, and rescue is a term I use very lightly. There was this rescue mission of children all the way in some South American jungle, and of course it's like the big white guy who comes in and like saves the day. What do you think about Sound of Freedom or movies like it as it pertains to our work and the issue of trafficking in general?
It's a movie, and that's where I leave it.
I hear that.
It's like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is a movie. It sparks the conversation. I think that as a movement, we have a responsibility to take those moments that people are interested in hearing or curious and knowing more to educate. And that's the best way, I think, to counter some of those sensationalized white savior moments that's on film. And, I would never take away from anyone's experience. And if that was truly someone's experience somewhere in the world, God bless. But that's not really what it looks like for the mass majority of us. And we can't ignore that.
I love that you said that. I think that something that you said just now was super important, being, you will never minimize a person's experience if that's what happened. And I think one thing that I love about the work that we do and our movement at large is we will never negate somebody's story. We will never negate if somebody says, this is what I've gone through, this is what's happened to me. And we always find a way to work with it. But I think you're absolutely correct in that it's kind of our responsibility as a movement to educate. And I'm hoping that, you know, this being our kickoff episode, that we can start with some of that education. And while we're talking about, you know, trafficking, I want to shift to Taken now, because Taken is another very popular movie. I don't even remember what year that was. Early 2000s or right in the 2009.
Did I watch that?
With Liam Neeson. So here's the thing. I saw it as a young person, as a small child, and I found it very entertaining. Now, this was, I want to say that was before my own trafficking experience. And I just thought it was an entertaining movie. There was this like older guy who's a father, and then like the young girl is just another teen who gets kidnapped from under a bed. And then, of course, in the movie, she's trafficked and smuggled to, I don't even remember the country, not Russia, but one of those faraway places. And, you know, at the time, I'm like, and then, okay, so the whole movie is about the rescue mission of the dad to save his daughter, which was a very good action-packed action movie. But, you know, in hindsight, Taken is one of those movies that really plays into the majority of the stereotypes.
Absolutely.
About trafficking.
Absolutely. Every time I meet someone, and not every time, but almost every time, that movie is the one that always comes up in conversation.
Always
comes up.
And it's so interesting that that's the movie that stuck with us. And even for me, I was like, that was a good movie. And then, like, you know, then I experienced it, and I'm like, oh, that was not
the movie.
Yeah, that was not what happened in the movie. And you know, it's funny that movie is the one that sticks out. And we'll talk about another movie that sticks out as well. But with Taken, it played into all the stereotypes. It was a white daughter, and I do think that there is there's a level, that's not the word. There is a role that the media plays in how society views trafficking as a whole.
Absolutely.
And because Taken played into the stereotypes, it was a middle-class white daughter, a very caring father figure or parent figure, smuggled across countries to a predominantly brown Middle Eastern
to not go to work.
Exactly.
Buy plane tickets.
Save his daughter.
Go find his, like.
Not to mention talking about, the right to have guns and all those other things. But, you know, but then even when she was smuggled, she was physically auctioned, where it was like people holding up like auction numbers. She had a needle in her arm. She was like, you know, kind of feeling lopsided and drugged and half naked and on a mattress on the floor in some random brothel or whatever it was that they had. So, you know, I think the sensationalism of trafficking is what probably sticks with people.
Yes.
And I recognize that if you are not a survivor, or if you are not somebody that does anti-trafficking work, or if you're not somebody that even does the public education sector like we do around this issue, it is very easy to grasp onto movies like Taken with the sensationalism to feel like, oh my God, I know about the issue now. And I get that. Yes. But, you know, I think this is part of the reason why we're having this conversation today, to kind of let people know, like in the U.S., it could look like that, but it doesn't always.
Exactly. And I think one of the things, that you brought up was, you know, middle class white girl. And that's one of the biggest myths for me, is the disparities that exist in trafficking, because what you see on the screen, what you see even put forth by organizations that do this work, many of them aren't brown and black girls.
That's very
the
true.
Publications don't reflect the mass majority of those who are being affected. And then on top of that, when you attend the task force meetings, you go to congressional hearings, those that represent this issue and this movement do not look like us.
Very true.
And that is oftentimes, you know, again, it's creating a narrative that is a myth. It's not, you know, it is what it is.
I think the racial disparities and inequities is a myth in and of itself.
Yes,
Like just
exactly.
the idea that, and again, partially the media's fault, and that everything that we see portrayed is the poor white girl, and not poor as
Yes.
in class. I mean poor like, oh, you poor thing.
Yes.
It's usually the white girl who's like, it really just deserves to be home with her parents. And I want to make very clear that in no way, shape, or form, I think, are either one of us saying that white girls who are trafficked don't deserve to be home with their families, because
Absolutely
we know
not. Yes.
everybody deserves to never be exploited or be pulled apart from their families.
Absolutely.
The majority of the population of folks in the sex trade are Black and brown individuals, are
Absolutely.
marginalized folks, are
Absolutely.
LGBTQ plus identifying. And I think that these movies make it seem that the majority of people that are trafficked from the US are middle class white girls who go to
Yes.
school and have friends and just want to have a good party or something.
Exactly.
And that's not the reality. So while we're still on movies really quickly, I'll shift gears from Taken. So we have Taken and we have Sound of Freedom that kind of are on one end of the spectrum that, represent the trafficking side, right? But then we have the system of prostitution. And it's important for folks to note that trafficking and prostitution are inextricably linked. I think that one of the myths or misconceptions in our society is that the two of them are separate, completely separate issues that need to be approached separately. But the reality, and I always tell folks this, right? I consider sex trafficking to be the vehicle and prostitution to be the destination. And that's specifically for folks who end up being exploited as children and then eventually stay in the system as an adult. But we have these two movies to represent the trafficking side. Now I want to talk about Pretty Woman, right?
Yes.
Because Pretty Woman, to this day, is one of the first movie that comes to mind when anybody says the word prostitution.
Yes.
That's the first movie people think of. And of course, I think it's perpetuated in our society, this narrative that prostitution is not that bad. You know, if you have a Richard Gere that's giving you money or buying you lavish gifts. And I won't get too much into the debate about, trafficking versus prostitution, but what I do want to focus on is this idea, this false narrative of what the system of prostitution, what sex trafficking looks like. Because some folks have this idea that, sometimes it's not all that bad. You might get a trafficker or you get fast cash, you make all this money and you get to keep it and you have all
these
this autonomy.
lavish material items.
Exactly.
And,
So talk about that. Talk about that misconception.
I've seen several sides of it. My trafficking experience included being trafficked on a track, as far as escort services. So I've seen that part of the Pretty Woman life. But again, where did it start? And this goes deeper into the conversation of, oh, well, if I just have to do that for a little while to get here, then I'll just be fine, because once I get here, my life will be great. And again, it totally ignores the like if you really wanted to dig into this movie Pretty Woman, let's talk about those private moments. Who was she before she got there? What happened in her life? What are her private thoughts before meeting the knight in shining armor? And we all know just from day-to-day lives is that there is no knight in shining armor. And I've learned that nothing in life is free.
That's very true.
Nothing in life is free. It's not enough to have a pretty face, and and you're gonna be lavish with these gifts, and it's a movie. I can't help but say, it's a movie, and that's where it should remain.
But a lot of folks have taken these movies and have used it as their source of education.
Yes.
The way that, for example, folks use pornography as their sex education. Well, Pretty Woman and Taken and Sound of Freedom have become the sole education for trafficking and what it looks like in actuality. It's funny because Pretty Woman is the first movie that we think about to this day. They even created a Broadway show of Pretty Woman, right? But then there were so many shows, right? And I'm not going to sit here and say that there aren't folks who end up in prostitution who don't make fast cash, who may not, there are folks that do experience having name brand designer this, or, we're able to dress in some very lavish clothing and things like that, but they represent the minority of people in this system. And I think what Pretty Woman did was kind of find the one story that could turn out like that, and of course sensationalize that. And of course society, the way we are wired as humans, we grasp onto the happy hooker narrative, right? This quote unquote happy hooker narrative. We grasp onto the idea that, like, oh, it's not that bad, all the abuse and the subversion and the commodification, because, like, he said he loved her at the end, And I think that's why it's so hard for people to grasp how harmful the system is, how bad sex trafficking is. There's all of these fights and this victim blaming, as I like to call it, of folks saying, well, like, why should we help her get services when she chose to strip, or why should we provide them resources when they decided to, because movies like this are showing that we have some kind of autonomy. But the reality is that the majority of people that end up sex trafficked are coming from a lack of resources, a lack of money, a lack of stability, and I always say you can't make a choice if you don't have choices. And that's the majority of us that end up trafficked. It's not the majority of us that live in penthouse suites and have a rich, universally handsome white guy say order everything off of room service. That it doesn't work like that.
No.
And if I had somebody that told me I can order one of everything on the menu, we'd be having a very different conversation. So, we talked a little bit about the definition. We talked about media. Let's talk about social media, because I think that this is something, and I know your work very well. I think this is something that you can speak to very, very prominently. And I think when we're talking about young people, not even just young people, but just as we talk about Gen Zs, as we talk about teenagers, as we're talking about folks in our community right now who are addicted to social media. And I feel like we can't even, progress throughout the day without it.
This is true.
We recognize, and for folks out there who don't know, pimps and traffickers are very innovative. These are not idiots. These are not dumb people. And, while we're on the topic of myths and misconceptions, I want folks to understand, I think there's this misconception, back to media, that traffickers look like what they did in the 70s and 80s from the movies, with the top hat, the big furry coat, the long chain. Even when you go like Halloween, right? You look at Halloween costumes, the pimp costume, the cane with the silky shirt and
the velvet suit.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
I laugh because we know that that's not what they out here looking like. But in addition to this misconception around their outfit, right? There's a misconception that these are like just violent, gang-banging men. They're probably high school dropouts. They just beat women, and they don't have any kind of sense of
savages.
You know what I'm saying? They think that they're savages. And I want folks to understand that not only are they not all savages, but they're also very intelligent with a very large set, if for nothing at all, of business and entrepreneurial skills.
Absolutely.
And part of having business and entrepreneurial skills is having the ability to innovate and change course and pivot very quickly as new trends come on the horizon. Social media is one of those trends. So tell me, what are some of the misconceptions overall that you hear about social media as it pertains to trafficking? Or at the very least, what is something that you want folks to understand about how social media plays a role in trafficking?
I want people to understand that traffickers spend much of their time strategizing, planning, and I always tell people that when a young lady is transitioning out of the life, to always keep in mind that it is her trafficker's job to keep her in her place, in her space. And we, those who do direct services, have to work twice as hard as that trafficker to give her an opportunity and a chance to be beyond that experience of being trafficked. They have time. They have time to watch. They have time to pay attention to trends.
Yep.
They have time to follow hashtags. And these are things that I tell to teenagers all the time. It's just being quite mindful of being aware and mindful of the trends, and understand that there are people that are seeking to harm you that pay attention and follow these trends because they know the most vulnerable, seeking that validation, just needing to be heard, and they're right there waiting.
It's so interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody in the studio recently who told me that she works with teenage girls specifically. And, you know, one of the things that she sees is what we know to be true as it pertains to grooming tactics, right? But one of the things that she sees is that her teenagers are not in a headspace yet to accept that this might be happening to them. And what they're seeing is what she's seeing is a lot of these young girls under 15 dating these men, quote unquote, dating these men who are 28, 30, 25. And they're just saying, you know, but miss, it's my boyfriend. Or, you know, and I know that, you know, this may not be something that's on the top of your mind, but I'm curious to know if you've seen this in the work that you do, working directly with young people. Do you see a lot of them saying things like, this is my boyfriend, he's just older?
I was that girl.
So was I.
I was that girl. Nobody could tell me nothing. You know, I was that girl. So I often see the pattern. It's kind of like you can see things happening before it happens. And I always have to think back to what could have someone said to me that would have made me take a beat or made me pause, made me think a little bit.
Have you come up with anything?
I don't have that answer.
I think we're all striving to figure it out. I mean,
you know, and I think that has a lot to just being a teenager. Trafficking aside, just being a teenager and raising teenagers. I've learned when they are in that space and they're focused on what it is they want, whether it's that boy that you don't like, whether it's that item they want to purchase. It's their tunnel vision. And the more that you push back against it, the more they want it.
They want it. Yep, that's very true.
So it makes it difficult because I've worked with lots of teenagers, and the unfortunate thing about social media is that, you know, everyone's seeking a life more than what they have. So when they see guys on there, you know, fanning money or presenting this lifestyle, they want to be a part of that. Those same lifestyles are portrayed in music videos. And then, you know, American culture, hip hop has become American culture. And the unfortunate part of it, because I love hip hop so much and for so many reasons, and it saved my life. But there's also another side of it that's being pushed by a larger agenda where they want these children to be driven by the criminal aspect and what that criminal lifestyle can gain them. And even if they say like, oh, well, you know, I'm just his girlfriend and, you know, and he takes me out, we have nice dinners, you know, he gets my nails done every couple of weeks, he gets my hair done. That's how it all started for me too. And there's no such thing as free lunch.
It's so crazy to hear you say that right now, because thinking back, like, you know, there's different ways of grooming somebody for trafficking. And there's specifically and especially different types of ways to groom young people, young girls, into trafficking. And commonly when I work with young people now who have been exploited, it's all the similar same things. It was the nails, it was the hair, it was the baby I love yous, even though that was not my case, right? I knew from the very beginning, my trafficker made it very clear, you here to work.
Yes.
Right? I didn't get all the luxuries, but you know, even with mine, there was this moment where he's like, "You sure you don't want to get your nails done?" Like, it got to a point where he's like trying to push me to do it because he's like, "I need you to fall in love with me, getting your nails done and getting your hair done and all that stuff." So it's just that just brought me back somewhere else. But social media plays such a role in the way that traffickers identify people, young girls, for exploitation, the way that they reach out to young girls for exploitation, the way that they communicate with them when they're being exploited. There's so many different things. And I know we cannot figure out all the answers right now, but what is something you think that we can do to prevent, or what is something you think that social media platforms can do to prevent the trafficking of young girls on these platforms, if anything? And I know this is a long question we've been working on for a while.
With all the wonderful technology that we have out there, you would think that there would be some system in place that flagged. Like, I want to know if a 33-year-old man is reaching out to my 16-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, and she's had this happen, and she's been very open, like, "Mom, this guy just DM'd me," and she'll show me his profile and everything. And quite many, not even quite a few, many adult, very adult men have reached out to my teenage daughter in some form or fashion. And so anytime if they say something in a picture, I'm right there responding. But I think where we have to start with teenagers and social media, it starts with trust between the child and the parent.
It's very true.
Because I wasn't in a space that I was comfortable talking to my mother about my day-to-day activities. Even in a moment when it sounded innocent. I'm busy in my life, she's busy in her life, and we loved each other and have great conversations, but it just never got that deep. And that's something that I was very intentional in my parenting. And they tell me everything, things I don't even want to know. It's like, it's like, no. But what I do appreciate about that is that you have to have a certain level of trust between the parent and the child so that even before they can see something happening, just because they're having day-to-day communication as a parent, we're able to see and hear what's going on. So I never come from a place of judgment as a parent. You know, when she tells me, for instance, and I know she's going to be like, "Why did you just use my story?" Because she's 16 and, you know, and she's like, "Oh, my boyfriend's getting my nails done." And, you know, trauma response for me. But it was just like, whoa. But I was just like, "Oh, okay. Who is this?" You know, and not to be defensive and not like all the alarms went off in my head, but I had to go to that moment of calm, you know, because she's at an age where she has a job, her friends have jobs, so a teenage boy could get her nails done,
Right.
you know, but I just asked questions in a conversational way. But I am investigating.
I hear that.
And I'm happy that she was comfortable telling me. Happy that she's comfortable telling me that, "Hey, I'm here with my friends doing this." And I don't have to worry about the sneaking around. I think parents don't realize how important trust is with their children. And they often don't realize it until it's too late.
I love that you say that because parents are a community. I mean, we talk to them, but parents are a community that I feel like we as a movement don't focus on enough or talk to enough.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes when we do anti-trafficking work, when we do public education, when we do public awareness building or spreading, we focus a lot on the harms of, and rightfully so, the harms of the buyers and the harms of the traffickers, or the conversation is shifted to the person that's exploited's behavior. And we often leave out that parents it starts there, right?
Absolutely.
Every one of us, I think with the exception of maybe 10 that I know personally, right? Every one of us that has been exploited has had some tumultuous relationship with our parents, whether that be a negative one where we are dysfunctional, whether we're functional but there's some secrets in the household, whether we're functional but there's some dismissal in the household or avoidance, whether there is dysfunction or partial dysfunction, but maybe some family members know, some don't, or they know and they choose. Like,
Absolutely.
there's always something in the home that contributes to the vulnerabilities. And when we talk about social media, traffickers know and traffickers prey on individuals that have these vulnerabilities.
I can look at someone's profile
and tell
and read that child inside out, up, down, and all around. And I was trafficked. So I can only imagine what traffickers can see when they see these posts, they read these posts, or they see the story. And this is another part about teenagers just putting it all out on social media. That's a whole nother conversation. Because they're able to piece you together. Before there was social media, there was a trafficker that was in the movement for a while, and that was helping law enforcement crack down on some of these things that were happening in the city. And he tells a story about how he used to choose his victims. And he said he used to walk around the mall. He would particularly look for someone who's walking by themselves. And he would walk up to them and just say, "Oh, you have beautiful eyes." And the child that looked to him and said, "Thank you," and kept walking, he knew that wasn't her. So as soon as he came in contact with the one who he gave the compliment to and they looked down at their feet, he automatically knew what it was.
That's very true.
And that same level of perception is now what they do on social media. And it's as scary as it is. Again, that all of it boils down to, and yes, we got to talk to more parents. From a prevention perspective, we go to high schools, we go to middle schools, but how often are we in front of parents and catching them while they're young? And I always say this for the victim and the trafficker, because these traffickers were little kids at some point too.
They know.
And they, and a part of those trauma bonds between the trafficker and the victim oftentimes deal with childhood trauma. So it's vitally important that we are making more contact with parents. That's why I also think that social media, again, is an amazing platform to spread awareness. I scanned through it recently just to kind of get an idea of like what's on Instagram versus what's on Facebook versus what's on TikTok. TikTok is conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory after like so much misinformation. I was even looking up well-known organizations around the country, and no one's really spreading that word. I don't see it.
Right.
Instagram, tons of information, great. LinkedIn, tons of information, great. Facebook, again. But you're only connecting to people who are already interested in the matter.
Yes.
So how do you we have to work with the same mindset and have the same focus as those that trafficked victims in order to make those contacts. And I don't know what that looks like, but until we figure it out, social media just leaves so many kids vulnerable to so much.
That's so interesting. You said, and this is, so how old were you when you were trafficked, if you don't mind me
17,
asking?
18.
So you were 17, I was 12, and then you said the statement, the traffickers were kids too. And the last thing I'll say about social media, is it just connected dots for me. And I'm sure connected dots for a lot of folks, right? Like, traffickers prey, when it comes specifically to children and young people, on the ones that they know they'll ask questions like that or say your eyes are beautiful to weed out who's insecure and who isn't. And when we think about social media and the role that social media plays in that, social media, even for a regular adult who's not involved in this in any way, social media plays on insecurities.
Absolutely.
Automatically. Everything is you got to have a body surgery. You got to be dressed a certain way. You got to have a certain amount of cash. And if you are coming from any of those homes that I mentioned, any dysfunction, any low self-esteem, any of that naturally, and then you couple that with how social media is making us believe that, you know, you got to have no belly, no this, no that, right? Like,
exactly.
Traffickers will continue to use social media, gaming platforms, so many other arenas to target individuals, kid or adult.
Exactly.
To be able to be like, you know, come, let me change your life around. It's just, we could have a whole episode on grooming alone.
Yes.
But, you know, you also mentioned something about preventative measures and prevention aspects. And I think after folks hear all about the nuances and, you know, the issues at hand, the next inevitable question is, well, what can we do? And we don't have all those answers right now, but what are some things that you suggest that you could tell the public out there? How can we prevent this from continuing? How can we prevent trafficking? How can we prevent the spread of misconceptions around this issue at large in the public space, the media space, social media, in whatever sector? What can we do? And to who are you speaking?
To whom am I speaking?
What can parents do? What can legislators do? What can so-and-so do?
There has to be penalties put in place for buyers. Bottom line. They cannot continue to get slapped on the wrist. And that, you know, I've had people ask me in conversations, well, why is that so hard? Why hadn't politicians put these laws into place? And my response is, because they're the buyers. Their friends are the buyers.
Right.
It's known fact let's talk about the majority of the buyers and what they look like, you know, and until there's penalties in place for them and their friends, we'll continue to have this issue, supply and demand. There's not enough conversation around you being enough just as you are. And instilling that in a child goes so far. And I can't even tell you how to do it because every child is different. But when a child knows that they are just perfect as they are, even in the confusion of being a teenager and figuring themselves out and not really knowing who they are, but having a foundation of that, I think will create it creates a what do you call those things that they put on horses? It creates like blinders to all the other distractions because you're not as influenced by what's there. I have another daughter that's in college, and she had to totally disconnect from social media because she just plainly stated like it was having a effect on my mental well-being. And that goes very far, you know, and it made me take a step back and even pay more attention to how I view social media and what I paid attention to on social media. And again, like you said, trafficking or not, we're so easily influenced by what's out there. But when it comes to children, there's got to be laws in place. There's got to be technology. Listen, if I can have a conversation with you today about going over to the jewelry district or the diamond district and buying a Rolex after this show, I know that when I go into Instagram, there's going to be an ad for a Rolex, whatever we discuss. I didn't Google it. I didn't look it up on my phone. So if the technology is that advanced, that I can have a conversation without picking up my phone, and there's algorithms in place to then show me ads based upon my conversation, you can stop adults from messing with little kids online.
That's true. That's good.
It's easy. I don't know how. but they do.
They do.
They do.
That's real.
It's easy. If they have the ability to do the weirdest things, because it drives me insane every time I have a conversation about something with a friend, and then I'm like, why is it in my phone right now?
Gotcha.
We can put some barriers in place.
So to recap, this is what I'm hearing. We hear that some of the misconceptions around this issue at large. We know that trafficking can happen in the U.S. It doesn't always happen in faraway places. We know that you don't necessarily need to be transported across state lines, country lines to be trafficked. You can be trafficked right here, homegrown in your backyard. I know I was. I know you were in your backyard. I know all the survivors we work with were in their backyards too. We know that zip ties and poison napkins and pizza tissues and Wayfair, we know that that is not an accurate depiction of what trafficking looks like. We know that movies like Sound of Freedom and Taken and Pretty Woman are either not the most accurate depictions or are decent conversation starters but don't accurately represent what trafficking looks like for the majority or the masses. We know that, or we've discovered that, social media plays a very vital and large role in the trafficking of young girls and children. We know that traffickers are innovative, and we know that they keep up with the times, they keep up with the trends, and like you said, they have the time to do this. They have the time to sit back and follow. They play the long game.
Absolutely.
A lot of people think they just snatch you up on the street and start whipping you and No, they take their time to make this relationship happen.
Absolutely.
And they need to establish that contact.
Which makes a victim feel that it's real.
Exactly. And that subversion of emotional energy is insanely real.
Absolutely.
And astonishing. We know from this conversation, as you mentioned, that we need to be speaking to parents more, and that we need to get them more involved, and that all of prevention can start in the home. The more young that they are, that you start having these conversations with your children, that can make an impact. We know that the more that you instill this idea of you are enough, that can help in the prevention, maybe not on the trafficker's behalf, but it can help them to not be so easily manipulated by the trafficker. We know, as you mentioned, that we need to have some stronger laws in place for sex buyers or for the people who are trying to manipulate and rape these children. We know that oftentimes they are some of the biggest perpetrators in the system of sex trafficking, in the system of prostitution. Did I miss any misconceptions around this issue?
And laws for tech companies.
And we need to talk to tech companies.
Penalties and laws and tech. They've got to take some responsibility. You know, there has to be some responsibility. There has to be a stance taken, because it just can't be so free. Yeah. You know, and again, there has to be some responsibility taken.
And we're having these conversations now in the legislature. I know there's a bunch of legislative bills out there right now that are talking about trying to reform tech companies or take away the loopholes in some of these laws that are shielding them from being held accountable for what they know is going on their platforms. So with that, I'm going to stop there. And you know what, Katrina, I like to end all of my episodes because we know that the work that we do is heavy and sometimes often difficult. We know that, trafficking is still happening as we're even having this conversation. But I also know that on the other side of that as survivors, we are strong and we are a lot more than what we've been through and what we currently do in the work sector in this movement. So I want to ask you, how do you use creativity as a form of resistance? What is one thing that you do that brings you joy? What, self-care is oversaturated now, but what is one thing you do for self-care? Something that makes you happy, and that can be an actual creative skill or talent, or it can just be something that makes you smile.
One thing that there's very little discussion on is life after the life. And for everyone, it's different. I love spa days.
I love spas.
I love sitting in a hot sauna and just sweating it all out. I love physical touch. So I love deep tissue massages. I love going to a hammam. I love all of that. And that's what I do for myself.
I love that.
I love to dance. I don't go out enough to do all of that, the dancing part and like hanging out. That's one thing I want to do more of this year. And I have a very strong desire just to see the world, and take as much time as possible to reward myself for all the hard work, because much of my life has been hard work, and no play.
Listen, and you deserve it. And when you decide to go have a next spa day, please take me with you. Yes. Katrina Massey, thank you so much for joining me today and having this wonderful conversation. Join us next week for our episode, Problems on the Ground, where we'll be talking about everything that we're seeing on New York City streets, in Queens and Brooklyn, and some of the ways that we can try to address that.
Awesome.
Thank you.